Hey, welcome back to the Keystone Carnivore Podcast. And just want to say a big thank you to everybody that's been on the podcast so far. We're only in episode number 6, so there's going to be a lot of great things to talk about related to carnivore, ketogenic diets, low carb, health and fitness in general, and anything else that these great guests have really shared with me about their life and just health and fitness in general. But in today's podcast, I have Jerome Armstrong on at Rational Muscle on Instagram. And we talk about how carnivore diet has changed our lives, philosophies about high intensity training related to the Mike Mentzer approach, and also Dorian Yates' philosophies as well. We're big proponents of that, and also some philosophy information too. So if you feel like this podcast would help a friend or family member, please share this with them and enjoy the show. Strong at Rational Muscle on Instagram is where you can find him. He is a weight loss coach. So Jerome, thanks for hopping on the podcast today.
My
And
pleasure.
tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into carnivore and maybe, high intensity training.
Sure. My name's Jerome. I'm an online weight loss coach, predominantly in the Milwaukee, Wisconsin area. I still deal with some local clients, but I'm trying to figure out this wild west that is online marketing and sales. I've had an interest in health and fitness for quite a few years, but my journey really begins about 5 years ago. At the time, my wife was pregnant. I was not coping with stress very well. I was trying to move up the corporate ladder. I was in college full time. I was a volunteer firefighter. And I just used food like a drug. And I gained, I think while she was pregnant, about 80 pounds. And I ballooned up to 297 pounds. And I'm a 5'11". Previously, I really enjoyed exercising 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. Still fairly low volume, maybe 5 to 7 sets of body part. But given my schedule, I realized that was not going to be sustainable. My wife threw me a surprise 30th birthday party. And there were a lot of friends and family that were there that I hadn't seen in quite a few years. And I was really, more than anything else, just embarrassed to have them see me in that condition, to see me at my heaviest, kind of my most emotionally distraught. For the most part, I basically just wanted to ask everybody to leave. And I kind of wanted to go into a corner of my house and cry and just shut everybody out. And I knew at that point, being a firefighter, that the number one killer of firefighters is heart attack. And with my weight continuing to trend upwards, the thought of my daughter growing up not knowing who her dad was just too painful of a thought. I figured somehow, some way, I have to crack this code. I have to figure this out and really take my health and my life back into my hands. And with my schedule at the time, working 40 plus hours a week in corporate America, volunteer firefighter, full-time school, trying to be a new dad, I literally went to high intensity training, specifically the version promulgated by Mike Mentzer, as a last resort. Mike advocated that most of his clients worked out once every 4 to 7 days for maybe 15 to 20 minutes of workout. And I figured, well, I could do that. So I took everything I thought I knew about diet and exercise at the time, and I said, I'm just going to set that on the back burner and just trust whatever he says. And what resulted was, within a year, I lost 80 pounds. My strength had skyrocketed. And I have been a firm believer in the benefits of high intensity training theory ever since. I have delineated from Mike's recommendations in regards to diet, but that has come mainly from intellectual curiosity and trying to really understand how the human body works on a basic physiologic level. Led me to being almost exclusively carnivore. I eat probably 90 to 95% carnivore. And if my body fat ever starts creeping up a little bit, I ever start getting a little bit out of shape, then I know basically all I need to do is just cut it back to red meat, salt water, and weight falls right off. So that's essentially my story in a nutshell. And then maybe for the last probably about 3 years, I've quit corporate America, stopped being a firefighter, quit going to college, And I've really tried to be the best personal trainer, weight loss coach that I could be.
Wow, Jerome. Well, that's an excellent story, to share with a lot of people, that are looking for motivation. Maybe they were in that same spot that you were at. And you said you lost how many pounds?
I think it was 89 within a year.
Okay.
And,
was that in the first year?
Yeah, that was within the first year of trying high intensity training and
Okay.
following diet the way that Mentzer advocated.
Okay.
And to clarify that, his approach is essentially calorie counting, high carbohydrate, low protein, low fat. But what caused me to deviate away from that was when I was heavier, I would have migraines maybe once a month, really debilitating migraines that would basically put me on the couch for a whole day. And those improved as I was losing weight. But I noticed that even losing a significant amount of weight, even getting my body fat down, I still had really frequent headaches. I'd have a pretty terrible headache almost every day and maybe a migraine a week still. I don't know if there's a genetic component. My mom has frequent migraines and is taking medication for it. So I figured there still had to be something I can do, predominantly through diet, that could possibly address those. And that led me to ketogenic and then ultimately to carnivore.
Okay. Yeah, I know about 5 years ago, I was getting ready for a contest, a drug tested show, and following the Mike Mentzer approach. And it was extremely hard with the diet because there's basically no fat.
Yeah.
It worked, but in the long run, it's very tough.
And what I realize now, I used to be really firm with this is the way to do it. This is how you should train. This is how you should diet. But there's something to be said for pragmatism. Working with many individuals, some people really like calorie counting. They're really math oriented. They like measuring. They like the structure and the discipline that goes into that. Some people don't want to deal with any of that garbage at all. If they just want to know what to eat, when to eat it, or if you tell them just eat once a day. While people can argue about what may be better from a physiologic standpoint, a diet that is perfect, that you only do intermittently, is not nearly as beneficial to your health and your performance goals as a 6 out of 10 diet that you can follow every single day. So I love those conversations. I love getting really gritty, really technical, but you have to work within an individual's preferences more than anything else.
Definitely. So with using the Mike Mentzer approach, as far as diet, and then how long after that did you kind of get more into like an animal-based carnivorous approach?
Sure. So it was, I had been extremely skeptical of ketogenic diets for quite some time. My default position with any aspect of reality is I think it's generally a good idea to default to the scientific consensus within any field until you can do whatever you determine to be an appropriate amount of independent investigation to change your mind or to either reinforce your beliefs. So I was extremely critical of ketogenic diets, specifically the difference between more like a Paleolithic ketogenic diet or dirty keto. People that deep fry hot dogs in like cheese kind of tortilla buns. I think that physiologically is absorbed differently by the body than somebody who focuses mostly on fruits, vegetables, whole cuts of meats, pressed oils, things like that. And what I just decided to give it a shot. At some point, there's an amount of information that you only get from firsthand experience. You can read as much as you want about any particular topic, but in a certain sense, unless you experience it yourself, there's something missing, right? Unless you actually step into that frame of reference for a while. So I tried ketogenic diets, and I was a big keto advocate actually for quite a while. Once I started, I was surprised how much better I felt. My headache frequency went way down, migraines rescinded to maybe once every 2 to 3 months. And carnivore, same kind of thing. I mocked carnivore when I initially heard of it. I heard of Sean Baker and I thought, man, this guy's going to have cardiovascular disease and have heart disease. And it was really Michaela Peterson's story on Joe Rogan that had me intrigued at how sensitive she was to everything that she ate. And it really caused me to reflect and say, okay, well, if Michaela is feeling so much better and seemingly is just having 1 to 2 really large ribeyes a day and not having any nutritional deficiencies, then I circled back to Baker. And I'm like, this guy's a 13-time world champion between the Highland Games. I think for a while he had the U.S. powerlifting record in deadlifts.
Yeah.
He's clearly not deficient if he's just eating red meat, salt, water. So then I started to sort of shoulder the nutritional guidelines that I used to just propagate mindlessly towards others. And really, I decided to look at things based on human physiology, how we actually work as people. And what I noticed when I tried carnivore, because a lot of people get into carnivore because of food sensitivities to fruits, vegetables, any plant-based food that may trigger some kind of immunologic response.
Yeah.
What I noticed with 3 days on carnivore, and I guess I should preface that by saying my ketogenic diet up until that point was essentially chicken breasts, romaine lettuce, olive oil, olives, fatty cuts of cheese, chia seeds, and avocado. So I was trying to optimize, like, what's the most nutrient dense ketogenic diet I could get, focusing on whole foods that still meets all of my dietary recommendations for fiber, omega-3 fatty acids, and gives me a complete nutritional profile. But after 3 days of just red meat, salt, water, my bedroom's on the second floor. I was walking downstairs, and on morning number 4, I had no pain in my knees. I had no pain in my ankle. I had no pain in my hip. I was sleeping significantly better, basically just dropping romaine lettuce, chia seeds, and avocado. So I don't know the specific chemicals that may be in those particular plants, but something in those at the proportion that I was eating was causing some degree of inflammation that has since been ameliorated by doing a carnivorous diet. So while I know a lot of people get into carnivore because they have specific sensitivities, mine was mostly just an intellectual curiosity. I kind of have this pattern of something's intriguing, absorb as much of it as I can, and then just try it firsthand. You have nothing to lose in a sense of just trying things. And actually you'll learn a lot about the process, but the biggest thing you'll learn about is yourself, your willingness to go for it, your willingness to stick to it when it gets difficult. And to me, life is just too short. So if I'm intrigued by something, I might as well try it. I got nothing to lose. And,
Definitely.
And that led me up till about June of 2019 is when I started doing carnivore, and I've been mostly carnivore ever since. Every now and then I like to have a little treat. I'm a sucker for red wine, so I'll 2 to 3 glasses a week, but that's my biggest diversion from carnivore.
Yeah, and I see a lot of programs out there. I read, Dr. Sean Baker's book probably around Thanksgiving last year. It was the only copy they had in our local bookstore around here in town in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. So it was making sure I was the first one to get it, get my hands on that. But, you do see people sometimes they'll go off, maybe they will have like a carb up or, maybe like a free meal. Then people will say, oh, well, you're not carnivore. Well, if you're eating, meat, salt, and water, 95, 90% of your week, I mean, you're doing all the things to, optimize your health,
Yeah.
with what they say, is going to help.
Mm-hmm. And there's a really interesting work-life balance or diet-life balance that everybody has to determine for themselves. There are so many words within diet and fitness that are really bereft of any real meaning. For example, everybody thinks they train with intensity. But if you watch the overwhelming majority of people that perform any given set at the gym, it's usually not that intense. They typically have at least another 2-3 repetitions in the tank. Everyone's got a different definition of healthy. If you ask 100 different quote unquote health experts, you'll get 100 different answers as to what's healthy. I was talking with a young lady today that told me she was shocked when she found out that V8 vegetable juice in a can is not healthy according to Jillian Michaels. there's a properly defined context has to be explicitly stated as an objective frame of reference to determine what is healthy or what is proper. And trying to view everything from first principles, how we actually physiologically operate as people, not based on epidemiology. How do we actually chemically interact with our food has been ultimately what led me to carnivore and by extension, high intensity training.
Okay. So did you feel like when you switched over to a carnivore approach, did that help with your high intensity training?
Mm-hmm. Well, high intensity training, I had zero strength loss. Now, I know a lot of people when they go very low carb or zero carb, typically have a slight decline in performance, especially if you're a top end athlete. But the average recreational gym goer, first, I don't think trains with a sufficient degree of intensity to where they could really appreciate any possible strength loss they may have. And second, once you're adapted, Finney and Volek have done fantastic studies on endurance cyclers showing that people that are fat adapted and have been fat adapted for at least 6-8 months replenish muscle glycogen stores at the same rate as carbohydrate fueled athletes, at least in endurance cycling. So at least we have a scientific study that posits a physiologic basis by which a carnivore athlete or a very low carbohydrate athlete potentially doesn't need dietary glucose. Even if I had a reduction in strength, which I didn't, I wouldn't view it as a concern because my primary goal as a trainer, as working with people, is health. And I firmly believe that if you diet and if you exercise in a manner that promotes and maintains optimal health, you will have the rational consequences of building muscle and losing fat. Too many people take the opposite approach where they will do almost anything they can to build muscle. If you take an average bodybuilder or gym bro, and I just despise the mentality of being a bro in the gym, and you just tell them about this new supplement that could build muscle, they'll take a handful without even thinking about it, with no consideration to any potentially deleterious health effects that they may have from overdosing on an unknown supplement. And that's ludicrous to me. High intensity training, I do posit, is the most scientifically accurate, valid theory of training. There's only one reality that we all experience, that we all live in. And because there's only one reality, there can only be one most accurate description of any aspect of reality, whether it's exercise, whether it's mathematics, whether it's the origins of the universe, or whether it's something as esoteric as art. Anything that exists in reality can be described and rated by objective criteria, bodybuilding, health, and fitness included. So my primary goal is always health and longevity. But I had zero strength loss off the bat. And I suspect that was predominantly due to mostly following a ketogenic diet for quite some time before switching to full carnivore. Interestingly enough, I know it's my own N=1 anecdote, but when I switched to carnivore, I felt like my muscles became more full in a sense. So I don't know if physiologically I was able to replenish more glycogen. It could be in my head. I would entertain that as a possibility. But even if someone loses a slight degree of strength, I think if the focus is bigger picture, what's going to be as close to an optimal diet that you can consistently follow for your overall health and longevity, and then build a workout routine to complement that. Any minor steps backwards, one step backwards will soon be followed by multiple steps forward in the right direction. So I wouldn't even worry about it, even if someone has a loss of strength.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, they come from, maybe they might come from that Mike Mentzer recommended high carb approach first, and then, they do see, the ketogenic, variations that you can go. And then also, carnivore is kind of like another level of its own.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on this? One of the things that I noticed was just having, a tiny bit of carbs before like an anaerobic workout, related to high intensity. I kind of follow like the Dorian Yates approach.
Sure.
To all muscle groups, one work set.
Yep.
To failure. Do you think just a little bit of carbs would help in that scenario.
I think it could. And we have to consider that there are multiple energy systems at play within a cell used to generate ATP to fuel muscular contraction against resistance. And those are going to be predominantly recruited, or I guess emphasized, because they all occur at the same time, just to varying degrees and proportions based on the nature of the stress. So training more like Dorian, Dorian was big on explosive lifts, right? You would lift very quickly, very explosively, and then you would typically have about a 4-second negative as you're lowering it.
Yeah.
We could look at things like the force velocity curve in terms of why eccentrics are so much better at stimulating strength increases. You have significantly higher force production, and actually more muscular tension. I would leave that as an area of optionality for individuals. And I think that's more pertinent to people that are probably closer to top end athletes. Why can't I think of his name? Stan Efferding with his vertical diet is essentially, it's largely a carnivore diet plus white rice or white potatoes. Very nutrient dense food. The most basic glucose form that you can have in white rice or white potato, bracketed around a workout to facilitate the workouts. But when you look at how those guys are doing their workouts, they're doing a tremendous amount of volume. And I would think within that context, you absolutely should, if performance is a primary goal of yours, you would want a good amount of carbohydrate, especially before your workouts. Me coming more out of like the Mentzer approach compared to Dorian Yates. Dorian believed, and correct me if I'm wrong, and this goes with anything I say tonight. If I'm wrong, correct me. If somebody watches this and I say something wrong, correct me.
No, you're good.
I want to learn. Dorian typically advocated one working set for each move out of a muscle group. So chest, you might have anywhere from 2 to 7 sets total working. And I think back, you went a little bit heavier in terms of volume, but something like chest, I think, was maybe only 3 or 4 sets. It's been a while since I've looked at his blood and guts routine.
Yep.
I'm a big believer that one set for any muscle group is sufficient to maximize your genetic potential. And I perhaps err on the side of caution that even if one set wasn't optimal, if one set was suboptimal and I could potentially get a little bit better degree of results by working multiple sets or working a muscle through multiple planes of movement, I would take that slight loss in progress that I may make versus the amount of additional impact and wear and tear that it would have on my joints. Plus, I value my time very heavily. So if I only have to work out once every week or so, or twice a week for 10 minutes of workout, I would rather do that. And some of the blood and guts routines can run 30, maybe 45 minutes, including the warm up, including your warm up sets. And by the time you finally cool down, and that's fine. If somebody likes their routine and they're making progress, I wouldn't change it. But if we're discussing what may be more or less ideal, there are a lot of varieties or a lot of factors that go into that. So if you're training that way, if you're a high performing strength athlete, I absolutely think some carbohydrate before your workout is probably a good idea.
Okay.
For comparison though, being on carnivore, every 6 to 8 months, I'll do the big 3, bench, squat, dead, and I'll get close to a max just to objectively measure strength progress. So I train very, very slow repetitions. I do almost exclusively machines. I basically don't do bench, squat, and dead the majority of the year. And every once in a while I'll bust it out just to see how strong I am. I lift with a cadence where I lift as slow as possible while still moving. So most exercises, it's a minimum of 4 seconds and probably 10 to 12 seconds in either direction, to the point of momentary muscular failure. So my time under load is significantly higher than conventional training and a little bit higher than like a Dorian Yates style training. So if you frame it within the context of just looking at time under load, you and I probably have pretty similar time under loads. Your 3 sets is probably fairly comparable to my 1 set for a given muscle group. I went down a little bit of a rabbit hole there. What was I talking? Given my longer time under loads, I don't think glucose is as important. The ATP phosphocreatine system fuels the first 10 or so seconds of intense activity, followed predominantly by anaerobic glycolysis, And then the byproduct of glycolysis, pyruvate, gets shuttled into the mitochondria through pyruvate dehydrogenase, which carries it in and then fuels the electron transport chain or beta oxidation, depending on your fuel source. So my sets are usually about 60 to 90 seconds a set. And because of that longer time that I have under tension, I don't think it's as important to have glucose. If I was just doing a single lift, if I was lifting more the way you do, I would absolutely probably have a cup of white rice maybe an hour before it worked out.
Yeah, and that's funny that you mentioned that, because that's pretty much what I do. Before those workouts, just a cup of white rice with, maybe 7 to 8 ounces of New York strip.
Yeah.
And then it's good to go. And surprisingly, that's a pretty small amount compared to what I used to do, is like maybe 6 cups a day.
Yeah. And I'm having competed myself, I'm sure you know that you probably bracketed carbohydrates and protein shakes pretty heavily around your workouts. You'd have,
oh my gosh, yeah.
You'd have 2 scoops of whey and then a bunch of dextrose or waxy maize, or, and then you kind of realize you don't need it that much.
Yeah.
So I don't remember what I was going to touch on quick. My big 3, last time I did them, I just did deadlifts. I pulled a 550 single, no straps, just over underhand. And I don't deadlift typically in a normal sense. That was just me in my basement warming up. Maybe once a year I'll do deadlifts just to kind of make sure the strength is there. Typically over the course of a year, what I do is I conventionally train every muscle group in isolation as close as I can. And the reason I train that way is if you're doing a compound pushing or pulling movement for any given exercise, it's a principle of engineering that a chain always fails at the weakest link, right?
Yep.
So, and over time, when you learn more about the kinesthetic chains and which muscle groups are involved, where you fail in the range of movement is typically going to determine what muscle group needs the most improvement. So you focus your bigger compound movements, and you typically do some isolation work to bring up whatever that weak link is. I argue that if all I do is work everything individually based on the anatomical filling of that joint, I will give every single individual muscle group the optimum growth stimulus. Then when I do those more compound pushing and pulling movements, the strength is there. It's more about conditioning that neuromuscular pathway. So a lot of people, like, especially now with coronavirus, they're thinking they're going to lose a lot of muscle. They're thinking they're going to lose a lot of strength. You don't lose muscle as fast as you would think. It takes almost a month sometimes of not training at all to lose muscle. And the number that I always give people is the average individual loses 1% to 2% of their muscle mass over the course of a year. But we're talking about sedentary Americans with suboptimal diets who don't go to the gym on a regular basis and typically aren't that active. So if you're thinking we might have like an 8-week or so shutdown, I think it's been 6 weeks so far. You're talking 6 to 8 weeks out of 52 weeks in a year of maybe a possible 1% to 2% reduction in muscle mass over that time. But if you're eating more protein, or if you're doing any kind of activity at all, you're really not losing muscle.
Yeah.
I had the study written down earlier, but and I'll send it to you.
Yeah.
It was something along the lines of 3 weeks of deload training showed no reduction in strength, size, or athletic performance in trained individuals. So what will happen is you won't necessarily lose muscle, and you can at least maintain or possibly even build muscle in this shutdown. If you're doing body weight squats, if you're doing push-ups, if you're doing pull-ups, at least doing them properly. But what happens is people lose a lot of strength because they're deconditioning that neuromuscular pathway. So if you're really good at juggling, and you can juggle without thinking about it, 3 objects blindfolded, you don't even know what they are, they're different weights, but you've developed that connection of feeling the weight and knowing how hard you have to throw it. If you don't juggle for 6 months or a year, or at least a couple of weeks, when you try and get back into it, you're going to be a little rusty. You're going to be throwing things too high. You're going to be throwing them off center. You're going to have to watch what you're doing. You're going to have things that are all the same size and shape until you recondition that pathway again. So it's not that you're losing tons of muscle and you're losing tons of strength. You just have to recondition that pathway to get your bench numbers back up. People are so afraid of losing muscle. And I tend to think for the most part, you probably just didn't have as much as you thought you did. when you
Yeah.
go back into the gym and your strength is down. Yeah, sorry to vent a little bit.
Hey, no, that's okay. One of the things I wanted to say to that point that you made about, people thinking that they're going to lose a lot. I know Mike Mentzer had a really good point. He said, and I don't know if you'll remember this, but he said that your workouts should be brief, very intense, and infrequent.
Yep. Those are essentially the three core propositions of high intensity training, whether it's Arthur Jones' approach, Mike Mentzer approach, Dorian Yates' approach, Jerome Armstrong approach.
Yep.
The same fundamental principles of any aspect of reality apply to everybody, allowing for a certain degree of variation based on genetics.
Yeah.
What I tell people, and it gets heated with some people sometimes, is I tell them you can train hard or you can train long, but you can't do both.
Absolutely.
And intensity by definition is a measure of energy that you're exerting relative to the amount of energy that you're capable of exerting at any given moment. So if Usain Bolt holds the 100-meter dash record, I think it's 9.09 seconds. He's running as fast as he can, and it's maximally intense for 9 seconds. If you stretch it out to the 400-meter dash or the 600-meter, the average speed goes down significantly because you can't maintain a maximal effort for a long period of time.
That's very true. Did you run track before?
No, I try and use a lot of practical metaphors to illustrate my points. And sometimes they're more or less successful.
No, that definitely makes sense. In high school, I ran track as well. And I remember the first time I mainly ran sprints, 100, 200. And then the first time the coach said, okay, you're going to do the 400 and 4x4 today. I'm like, oh, damn, how do you judge that? Do you go all out? At what point do you, back off, or, how do you run the first 200? So that definitely goes to that point. You can't train intense and for a long period of time. You have to do either or.
Yeah, and you need to train respective not only to your preferences but also to your goals. And you need to be very specific with what your goals are, because in a sense, and you know how it is when you're contest lean, when you're the day before stepping on stage, a real fit looking body isn't necessarily a real fit body in terms of performance. No. The guys that look super lean on stage and have 8-packs and your skin is paper thin, you're almost passing out every time you stand up. Your hormones are jacked up because your calories are so low and your body's doing everything it can to try and get some fat back, and you're doing everything you can to burn it, that you'll see a sad commercial on TV and you start crying and you can't even control it. I don't miss those competition days at all. But that's something that not a lot of people get to experience. And I kind of wish everybody could, just for that perspective. You need to be very clear, whether it's performance, whether it's aesthetic, what is your goal? And objectively, based on the fundamental principles of biology, anatomy, physiology, and nutritional biochemistry, what is the objectively best way to achieve that goal?
Yeah. And with, being stage ready, you said you competed as well before?
Yep.
Okay. How long ago was it that you did a show?
That was 2009.
2009. So. Okay. And how did you feel? You said, how did you feel that day?
Just awful. So I think I had been drinking about 2 gallons of water a day up until that Wednesday. And then, as you cut the water back, morning of the show, I couldn't drive. I had to just sit in the passenger car. I'd have somebody take me to my show. And backstage, you go out there for the pre-judging in the morning, and you're doing okay. And then you don't want to consume a lot of water after that, because you still have the evening show. So you're having Skittles or gummy bears or something to keep your sugar up. You feel terrible for the most part. Now, thankfully, most individuals are capable of getting fairly lean and having a fairly appreciable aesthetic physique and still feeling good. So I think you ought to diet and train in such a way that you can be as lean as you possibly can while maintaining optimal health. And for some people, they're going to have a great set of abs. Some people might just have a flat stomach and a nice 4-pack. I would allow for individual preferences and genetic variability within that. But I'm a big believer that health ought to be the primary focus of your diet and of your training.
Yeah, and we talked a little bit about Stan Efferding too, and he had a really good thing on one of his rants before. I think he said, if you want to be healthy, don't compete in anything.
Yeah.
And, you look at all these sports nowadays, football, all these concussions. And, we don't have a lot of sports going on now, but if you can imagine what, it takes to perform at that high level, at some point it's not healthy.
Right. And also worth mentioning is your mental and emotional health as you're competing at that high level. Everybody knows that bodybuilders and most performance athletes are probably on copious or nightmarish amounts of performance enhancing drugs, because it's, in a sense, everybody knows about it. And if these industries wanted to get drugs out of sports, they could, but for the most part, we want better highlight reels. We want new world records. We want quarterbacks putting up Patrick Mahomes numbers of 560 yards a game because it sells tickets. We could very easily get drugs out of sports if we wanted to, but unfortunately, my belief is that the overwhelming majority of professional athletes, even like tennis players and stuff, are probably on a slew of drugs that would be nightmarish to the average individual. And working with people too, you know how important somebody's mental and emotional connection with food is, with their workout routine. I understand the mindset of people that like to exercise on a regular basis because it makes them feel good. And while I do believe that one workout, depending on your genetics, every 4 to 7 days may be ideal in terms of building muscle and losing fat, if somebody needs that emotional certainty because it makes them feel good and it keeps them from indulging in behavior that might otherwise be harmful to their health, going to the bar, drinking, cheating on their girlfriend or whatever, I wouldn't take that away from them. But deeply, if you want change in anything, we kind of look at things backwards. The goals that we explicitly state for ourselves are just a guess. What we actually want from a goal is the emotion that we attach to that goal. So someone that says they want to lose 20 pounds, they're just guessing. And you've probably seen it too. Most people that say they want to lose 20 pounds probably need to lose closer to 40. But what they really want is they want the set of feelings that they think they're going to have when they lose 20 pounds. A sense of accomplishment, a new sense of identity, not feeling bad about themselves when they look in the mirror. Maybe they want their partner or a potential partner to look at them in a different way. And it's different for everybody. So to really, maybe I should just say, I generally abhor people that will just sell diet and exercise plans on Instagram for $50. And you see it all the time.
Yeah.
And you and I could probably make a lot more money if we just said, drop me a DM, here's my diet, and here's my workout program. But to really have lasting change in your clients, you need to get to the underlying mental and emotional issues that they've built over 20, 30, 40, 50 years with food and with these habits. And it's tough because you have to do it as a coach in such a way to where you can't always explicitly state that, because for some people that's too much. They don't want to open up. They don't want to share that. But if you really want lasting change, it's a good coach should be committed to. You have to change their underlying emotional associations. Anybody can have willpower for 12 weeks, for 16 weeks to do a contest diet to get bodybuilding lean. But if you don't want them to be in the 95% plus of people that go back to gaining all of that weight back, then you really need to change those associations.
Definitely. You sound like you have a lot of good stuff about mindset and goals.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to think what other. Oh man, that's another road we could go down too. As far as you have a new client, and they're all confused, about diet and exercise. Where do you kind of start with them as far as like setting realistic goals, or maybe not realistic goals?
So I have a questionnaire that before I take anybody as a client, I won't, even if somebody wants coaching, I won't just sign them right away. I have to talk to them for typically at least 30 to 60 minutes just to make sure we're a good fit. Because some people like more of like the Jillian Michaels in your face, yelling at you, holding your feet to the fire approach. Some people need a more gentle hand. And I've never been the kind of guy that could just get in somebody's face and yell at them. So I usually ask people, what have you tried before that has worked? Because people that come to coaches or come to personal trainers typically have done so because they've been trying this for a long time and have never had the type of results that they think they could or should have. So that doesn't mean, though, that they haven't had any results at all. So I typically start from a point of what have you tried that you felt has worked to some degree or could work? And we start with that, and we can always change things. And then in my first conversation I have with everybody, one question I always ask is, if you had a realistic magic wand and you could point to 1 year from now, what would your life look like? What would it look like with your physique? What would it look like with your job, with your relationship, with your finances? And the purpose of that is to get them to focus on something that is so deeply profound and positive and moving that they feel that they're moving in that direction. So we don't, and again, those goals are just guesses. For some people, it's, I want to make 80 grand a year instead of 70. It's, I want to find the type of person that I can settle down and start a family with. But becoming the type of man or woman that integrates the daily disciplines necessary to make that kind of lifestyle happen, that's something to really look forward to. That's something to feel great about. And when you get somebody really locked in on what their life could be like in a year, knowing that the biggest barriers anybody ever has isn't financial, it's not even necessarily interpersonal, it's always emotional. Our emotional hurdles are always the biggest thing stopping us. And usually it's just fear of failure or putting ourselves out there. When you get them so sold on the belief that, like, this is what my life could be if I'm willing to put in the work, for the most part, they'll follow whatever diet or workout program you give them. So you stick with them with something that they've tried before that they like. If somebody likes Zumba tapes, I'm not going to take them off Zumba tapes, even if I think for the most part, I'm not a big fan of them. I can always make those changes over time. But for now, it's about conditioning the daily habits necessary to start pointing their life in the right direction of ultimately what they want it to be. Like I said earlier, sticking to a plan that's a 5 out of 10 or a 6 out of 10, 7 out of 7 days will do so much better for you in your journey in life, whether it's your fitness, your finances, your relationships, than a perfect 10 out of 10 plan that you only follow once every now and then. So whether personal trainers know it or not, they are in a sense life coaches by default. Now, whether they choose to optimize on that and actually develop that skill set is ultimately up to them. But if you want the best degree of results out of your clients where they can have lasting results, and after a period of 6 months or a year to where they don't need you anymore, and that's a point where we should all be trying to get to, we don't need our coaches because we've developed that skill set. You have to address the underlying mental and emotional issues. People can talk about diet, they can talk about exercise, they can talk about supplements, they can talk about this. But if you're not sold on the idea that you absolutely must change, you must change today and you can change, and that someone has been down that same road as you have, and they know the questions you're going to have, and they know the answers to the questions before you even ask the questions, it becomes significantly easier. So this is absolutely a mental and emotional journey. But unfortunately, that's not something I can typically just explicitly say to people when I'm working with them on the onset, because the walls go up and they're thinking like, I can't open all that up to this guy yet. So I tend to focus more on, okay, let's just focus on diet for now. And let's focus on exercise and let's do this. And then every week we might change something a little bit different. In terms of goals, I usually try and encourage people to set a number in their head, because if I throw a number out, it doesn't have the same relevance as if it gets them thinking intrinsically, what do I think I need to change? Plus, then it gives me a point of view of how realistic or potentially unrealistic are they in their expectations.
Okay. That's definitely great information. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And what do you think what good qualities make a good trainer or coach?
I think first and foremost, you have to realize that you're being paid to get a result. It's your job as a trainer to get the results that your client is determined to have, using whatever methods you deem to be the most appropriate based on their individual preferences. But also, I think a trainer ought to work in such a manner where safety is top priority. Yes. I'm not a fan of any high impact moves. I think burpees are awful. And The acronym I use for resistance training or exercise in general is STEEL, STEEL, safe, targeted, effective, efficient loading. You should go to the gym with the purpose of trying to safely overload targeted muscles using the weights, not go to the gym to see how much weight you can mindlessly lift and see how long you can mindlessly endure. And I think if you're doing that in such a manner and then supplementing it with a balanced diet that people can stick to, or ideally a more nutritionally optimized diet, something closer to carnivore, then I think the results largely take care of themselves. But like I said earlier, this is such a mental and emotional journey that you really have to get your client to open up. You really have to get them to express what they're afraid of, what they've tried before, what they feel good about, what they would be willing to do, what they would not be willing to do. So I do a lot of things when I work with clients. There's that initial conversation that I mentioned with the realistic magic wand. We talk about something that I call the money game, because money is an issue for a lot of people, especially now. And I'm a big believer that money is essentially an emotion. You can always make more money. You can always get really creative and resourceful, but the people that have a negative emotional association to money, it's no reason that they never have a decent abundance of wealth. That if you don't like money, if in your gut level reaction you just abhor the rich and you despise anybody that has any degree of financial independence, you will always be living paycheck to paycheck, because the thought of acquiring more wealth, and it doesn't even have to be anything superfluous, but if the thought of requiring more money than you need is this negative gut level reaction, you'll never have excess amounts of it. But what you really realize is money is your ability to create value for other people. Like I said, most personal trainers way undervalue their services. And I won't name it explicitly, but there's a carnivore platform that people can go to for coaching. I think you probably know who I'm talking about. And
MeatRx.
Yeah. Okay. You can name it.
Yeah.
And most of those coaching conversations are $25, maybe $17 to $25 for a 30-minute conversation with somebody who's a certified carnivore coach. But when you have the type of conversation that, even if you do it for free as a coach, that could set somebody's life in a direction and get them to think bigger than what they currently have and get them to think a little bit more outside of the box, that conversation is worth hundreds of dollars. Yeah. And it's more about finding the right person. The average online personal trainer could very easily make $300 plus a client if you qualify the right people out, because it's not about an actual dollar amount. $300 for some people is a lot of money. For some people, it's not a lot of money. So when I work with clients, I don't have a set rate. My rate is whatever it takes for that client to be emotionally committed to the process, to make them a little bit uncomfortable, to where they have to think about it, to where they say like, oh my God, like I have to do this now. Like if you've ever had a big credit card bill and you know that you have to pay it and you're sweating, you're not quite sure where you're going to get that money from. It's not keeping food off the table, but it's making things a little uncomfortable. So you have to get the best out of it. That's how I think a lot of trainers ought to price their goods and their services. Most people way undervalue the influence that they can have on another individual. And having competed, and I don't know your story, but when I was heavier, when I was 300 pounds, I would have paid a lot of money to save the time that somebody could have saved me if they just said, do this, and coached me through that first year. That would have been worth a lot of money to me. Instead, I had to spend years with trial and error to determine what I think is objectively the best method to achieve those same results in less time. But money is an emotion. It's a sign of respect that an individual is committed to the process, that the coach and the trainer are going through this journey together and they're committed to the same results. And whether that's $50 for an individual, and I've worked for $5 a month with some people when I was first starting out, because I had to get something as a sign of respect for that relationship, but it's making sure they're committed to the process. And then I've had clients over $500 a month, and most people, like I said, way undervalue their services and the pain that they can get somebody out of. And if you're a trainer, you ought to want to help somebody as much as you can, because you know the pain and you know the angst that they're going to have and you know the frustration that they have, and you know you can get them out of it with your experience, with the time that you've put in, with the hours that you're reading anatomy and physiology textbooks to determine the best way to do X, Y, or Z. Yeah. Somebody can come to you and they won't pay you more than they want to, So if it's $5, if it's $50, if it's $500, it doesn't matter. It's just to get them committed to the process. And then if you have to eat it as a trainer, if you have to jump on the sword and work for somebody for $20 for that first month just to get them locked in and then negotiate something further down, worst case scenario, you put a little bit of money in your pocket and you set them down a path and you gave them the best of your knowledge and your skill and your ability, and you can take a lot of emotional comfort in that. So again, I'm sorry, I think I go down a couple rabbit holes or some tangents when I talk, but time is our most valuable asset, right?
Yep.
We never get it back. And that's, again, even if the way I work out produces suboptimal results, if I can get it done in 10 minutes of workout instead of 30 minutes of workout, I will take that 7 days a week. I will always take that side of the bargain. I think we ought to live in such a manner, knowing that every interaction we have with another human being could be our last. Every conversation, every time we're at the grocery store and we're checking out, that could be our last dialogue with that person. There's something beautiful knowing that we might not be here tomorrow. I hope I'm here. I plan in such a manner that I would like to have a long, beautiful, emotionally fulfilling life. But I'm at a place emotionally where if for whatever reason something happens, I get in a car crash, I get COVID and I pass away. There's 1,000 things out there that might take my life tomorrow, but I am in a place emotionally where if that happened, there's nothing I can do about it. Yeah. So I might as well not get frustrated about it. But I take a lot of peace in knowing that I live my life in such a manner that I will always give my best to my clients, whether it's $5 a month or $500 a month. And if you treat people in such a manner, knowing that this might be the last time you ever get to talk to this person, what kind of knowledge do you want to impart on them? What do you want to take away from this conversation? How do you really want to connect with another human being and show them that you just value their time and the beautiful reflection of their spirit, that you value them as a human being? That's priceless. You can't put money on that. And again, that's why I just keep going back to this is such an emotional thing that we do, helping people out of the pain of their frustration of not being in shape, of not being able to build muscle. It's all about getting out of pain.
Definitely. I'm glad you brought that last point up, because I just put a posting on Facebook and Instagram. We've had beautiful weather here today. The last couple of days, it's been downpour. We've had, I think, like 3 inches. And then we have, the Susquehanna River, that's gone way up. It's kind of like, it looks all depressing. Everybody's staying inside. And then also, they're reporting on, these terrible numbers on the news, all these cases and all these deaths. Yeah. And Pennsylvania seems to be like one of the most depressing states. But I saw something interesting when I walked outside today. Everybody's, happy. Yeah. Walking their dogs. Saw a couple people out on their deck having birthday parties. Everybody's mowing their grass. They're having fun. They're saying hi. Mm-hmm. And, I think that's the kind of numbers we should be looking at. And hopefully, that can give somebody, motivation and hope for today.
Yeah, and I think you need to be really careful with what you put in front of your face, especially when you get up in the morning. If you've ever gotten up in the morning and had started the day off on the right foot, that is a total 180 from getting up and having a bunch of emails or texts from your boss about things you have to do, or turning on the news and finding out there's another fire or shooting in a city near you. When you get up in the morning, you need to guard your emotions like a mama bear guards her cubs. Because if you start your day off in a beautiful, positive, productive manner, it makes the rest of the day so much easier. And the opposite is true conversely. If you wake up and you're immediately behind the 8 ball, you're not going to be too highly motivated to stick to your diet, to do the workouts that physically are extremely uncomfortable. Social media is an incredible blessing, but also extremely negative to a lot of people. But same thing here. I took my daughter to walk in the park the other day, and families out walking their dogs. Everybody's happy. They're still being largely respectful of social distancing. But that's what life is about. Like, life is about living, right? Not being afraid to go out. A fear of death is not a love of life. It's one of my favorite quotes from Atlas Shrugged. And I refuse to live in such a manner that fear dictates what actions I do and do not take. Life is too short for that.
Yeah. That's awesome. Awesome stuff.
Yeah, I've had a great conversation so far.
Jerome, is there any other information you'd like anybody to know, any advice you'd like to give, maybe somebody that's, kind of, interested in health and fitness, maybe where to get started?
Sure. I guess the first thing I would tell any individual is the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. We've been under lockdown for 6 weeks so far with COVID, and I suspect there's going to be a lot of people that come out of this in worse health than when they went in. It's never too late to make a positive change in your life. But to do that, you really have to get to the emotional root of the problem. What is it you're ultimately hoping to achieve? And once you kind of figure that out about yourself, or you can help with a coach. And I know you talk to people. I give free 15-minute phone calls all the time. I have a link on my Instagram page. Once you figure out what that is, once you figure out the how, the what becomes a lot easier. Because if you're determined enough, if you're motivated enough, you'll find whatever you have to do. Even if it's something that sounds really obscure and really odd, you'll just try it because you know that you have to do something to take control of whatever aspect of your life it is. And as the old admonition goes, and I know it's been done to death, but if I can do it, anybody could do it. I lost 89 pounds in a year. I've been coaching people ever since. This is what I love to do. I quit a job in retail making pretty decent money to take this risk of having to wake up in the morning now and coach individuals who are all going through the same journey together. And I haven't looked back, and it's been a beautiful, frustrating, but extremely rewarding journey. The other thing I would highly recommend is everybody read philosophy. Study the basics of logic, of Aristotelian logic. And the reason for that is logic is a formal language that is descriptive of reality. And like I said earlier, reality is objective. There can only be one most accurate description of any aspect of reality. And when you start seeing how illogical some people are, especially our politicians with some things, you realize you can cut through a lot of the BS. And any single individual with a semi-intact functional brain is capable of making the discernments necessary to improve their health, their fitness, their finances, their relationships immediately, starting right away. But reality requires which actions we have to perform precisely and on a consistent basis for the acquisition of any goal. You have to do what reality requires. Not hoping, not wishing, none of that will work. You have to take action, and you have to take the correct action. So get to the emotional root, read some philosophy, and ask for help. People are more than willing to help, and you're going to save a lot of time. You're going to save a lot of frustration, and your journey is going to be a lot easier. We're so afraid to embarrass ourselves, to make ourselves look bad in public on social media, that we don't realize how much you and I and people like us get out of these free phone calls that will never sign somebody to be a client. Because we feel that like we wish we had that when we were going through the same thing. So it's one of my favorite things is talking to people. It's getting to know people, getting to know their journey. And I've bloviated a bit too much here, but anybody can do it. Anybody can do it. But you have to take action. And like I said, the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago.
Mm. Awesome stuff, Jerome. I'm really glad that I was able to get on here today with you, and thank you for taking time on a Saturday night to hop on here. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on it. And anytime you want to talk, brother, I would love to hear your story sometime.
Yeah.
I know we didn't really get into specifics about diet. I'd love to talk specifics about carnivore, about resistance training, about supplementation. There's so much to talk about. But I really love getting to meet and connect with like-minded individuals.
Yeah, I know you can talk about this stuff for hours, and you can't get it all in 45 minutes to an hour. Mm-hmm. But I'll definitely be having you on the podcast sometime soon and down the road.
Awesome. Anytime you want, brother.